These 5 men have just over 24 hours to surrender to the FBI. Evan Liberty, 26, a former Marine from New Hampshire. Donald Ball, also 26, a former Marine from Utah. Nick Slatten, 25, an ex-Army sergeant from Tennessee. Dustin Heard, 27, a former Marine from Tennessee, and Paul Slough, 29, a former Army veteran from Texas. All 5 were involved in a fatal attack on September 16, 2007. 17 Iraqi civilians were killed when Blackwater contractors opened fire in Baghdad's Nisour Square. They claim they acted in self-defense, but a number of investigations have already concluded they did not. The FBI says 14 of the 17 shootings were unjustified. The U.S. military has gone further. In its own investigation of Blackwater, it concluded the deaths were all unjustified and potentially criminal. In spite of this, the head of Blackwater appeared before the United States Congress soon after the attacks to testify under oath he believes his men acted responsibly.
Please be seated.
To the extent there is any loss of innocent life ever, let me be clear that I consider that tragic. Every life, whether American or Iraqi, is precious. I stress to the committee and to the American public, however, that I believe we acted appropriately at all times.
What complicates this case is the question of jurisdiction. At the time of the attack, private contractors like Blackwater operated without any clear legal oversight. Until recently, it could be argued these security personnel didn't have to answer either to Iraqi or U.S. laws. And many politicians in Baghdad have said this was done on purpose to protect contractors in case a situation like this ever arose. What's more, under the deal Blackwater had with the U.S. government, it was allowed to repair the vehicles involved in the attack before investigators had a chance to look at them, meaning forensic evidence in this case is very, very limited. Helping the prosecution, however, is that a 6th man, also a suspect in the case, has agreed to testify against his colleagues in exchange for lesser charges. Owen Fay, Al Jazeera.
Blackwater is an American private military company founded in 1997 by former Navy SEAL officer Eric Prince. It was renamed as XE Services in 2009 and now currently known as Academy since 2011 after the company was acquired by a group of private investors. The company received widespread notoriety in 2007 when a group of its employees killed 17 Iraqi civilians and injured 20 in Nisour Square, Baghdad, for which 4 guards were convicted in the United States. Academy provides security services to the United States federal government on a contractual basis. And since 2003, the group has provided services to the CIA. In 2013, Academy's subsidiary, International Development Solutions, received an approximately $92 million contract to State Department security guards. As of 2014, Academy merged with Triple Canopy, a subsidiary of Constellus Group, which is another private security company which provides integrated security, mission support, and risk management services to corporate, government, and nonprofit clients. In the noon hours of September 16, 2007, a car bomb exploded near the Isidar compound where U.S. and Iraqi officials were meeting. A 19-man Blackwater tactical support team consisting of a convoy of 4 trucks answering to the call sign Raven 23 took up positions on the south side of Nisour Square to secure an evacuation route for the U.S. officials and another Blackwater team providing security for them. The Blackwater commander, Jimmy Watson, had received an order to stand by and not leave the green zone upon reaching a checkpoint, but he made the tactical decision to advance to Nisour Square after waiting for a few minutes. Upon informing the Blackwater Tactical Operations Center of this, he was ordered to return to the green zone. However, after Raven 23 entered Nisour Square, Watson was ordered to lock down the traffic circle to expedite the travel of the other Blackwater team. Shortly after assuming their positions, Raven 23 began firing on civilians in response to an approaching car, killing 14 and wounding 20 more. Nisour Square is located in Baghdad, Iraq. However, more to the story. The incident itself was unprovoked. A State Department spot report published the same day as the incident stated that 8 to 10 attackers opened fire on Raven 23 from multiple nearby locations, with some aggressors dressed in civilian apparel and others in Iraqi police uniforms, after the convoy had entered Nisour Square starting at 12:08 p.m. The report added that another Blackwater Tactical Support Team, TST-22, who had escorted the officials and TST-4 back to the green zone, was redirected to support Raven 23. Raven 23 returned defensive fire, withdrew from Nisour Square with one of its Bearcat vehicles in tow. As Raven 23 was departing Nisour Square, several members continued to discharge their weapons, causing additional civilian deaths and injuries. TST-22 arrived in Nisour Square after Raven 23 had left. When TST-22 tried to withdraw, its route was blocked by the Iraqi Army and police vehicles. The U.S. Army convoy arrived at 12:39 p.m., backed by air cover, to escort TST-22 back to the green zone. An Iraqi government account of the incident stated that as the convoy drew close to Nisour Square, a Kia sedan with a woman and her adult son in it was approaching the square from a distance, driving slowly on the wrong side of the road. That the driver ignored a police officer's whistle to clear a path for the convoy. According to this account, the security team fired warning shots and then lethal fire at the Kia. They then set off stun grenades to clear the scene. Iraqi police and Iraqi army soldiers, mistaking the stun grenades for fragmentation grenades, opened fire at the Blackwater men, to which they responded. Iraqi investigators also alleged that Blackwater's helicopters fired into the cars from the air, and at least one car had bullet holes in its roof. Blackwater had denied any of its aerial units discharged weapons. The account by the Blackwater firm differed from the Iraqi government's account. Blackwater's account stated that the driver of the Kia sedan had kept driving toward the convoy, ignoring verbal orders, hand signals, and water bottles thrown at the car, and continued to approach even when fired upon. An Iraqi policeman went over to the car, possibly to help the passenger, but the vehicle kept moving, and it looked to the guards as if the policemen were pushing the car towards the Blackwater TST. In their view, this confirmed that they were under attack by a vehicle bomb, whereupon they fired at the car, killing both people in it, as well as the Iraqi policeman. In response to the guards' killing of the Iraqi policeman, other Iraqi police officers began to fire at the Blackwater men, who communicated to the State Department Operations Center that they were under attack. The State Department employee who was walking into the department's Baghdad Operations Center on the day of the incident heard a radio call from the convoy. Contact, contact, contact. We are taking fire from insurgents and Iraqi police. According to Blackwater Vice President Marty Strong, the convoy was hit with a large explosive device and repeated small arms fire, which disabled the vehicle. Several sources have stated that the explosion was caused by a mortar round, though this is not reflected in the State Department's incident report. On September 27, 2007, the New York Times reported that during the chaotic incident at Nisour Square, one member of the Blackwater security team continued to fire on civilians despite urgent ceasefire calls from colleagues. It remains unclear whether the team member mistook the civilians for insurgents. The incident was allegedly resolved only after another Blackwater contractor pointed the weapon at the man still firing and ordering him to stop. 3 Blackwater guards who witnessed the incident later said they believed the shootings were unjustified. Ali Kanai was 9 years old when he was shot in the head by Blackwater guards in a traffic circle in Baghdad, Iraq. He was in the back seat of his father's SUV with 2 of his cousins. Their mother was in the front seat. Ali's father, Muhammad Kinai, was driving and saw 4 armored cars enter the traffic circle from the wrong direction. The soldiers held up their hands for traffic to stop. Muhammad stopped his car. He initially thought the men were U.S. soldiers. They were not. It wasn't unusual for regular U.S. Army convoys to stop traffic. The traffic circle Nisour Square was only a block away from one of the main entrance gates at Baghdad's Green Zone. When Muhammad looked to his right, the driver of the car next to him shouted that the soldiers had just shot into another car in front of them. Suddenly, bullets began to riddle Muhammad's car. A rocket grenade was fired into the car next to him. The man that had just spoken to him was dead. He had tried to run, but was laying in a pool of blood, killed by machine gun fire from the armored cars. The Kenai family and 5 other victims of the Blackwater Guards were convicted of killing at least 14 innocent Iraqi citizens that day and injured dozens more. Almost everyone who was killed or injured was shot in their cars, taxis, or buses. The ones who were killed on the street were shot running for their lives. Ali was the youngest of Blackwater's victims that day, and its founder, Eric Prince, and the 4 men who were convicted of murder later on charges in a civil lawsuit filed in North Carolina, the home of Blackwater's headquarters, a training facility in Moyac. Muhammad that day was going to visit his sister and her children as he was leaving his youngest son, who was affectionately given the name Alawi, asked to go with his father. Although Muhammad was going to return quickly with his sister and Ali's cousin for a visit, Muhammad told his son that he could go with him. Their route home was through Nisour Square. Muhammad was thrilled when the U.S. entered Baghdad years early in 2003. Muhammad had met members of the U.S. Army on the streets and handed out candy and juice when he saw them. Muhammad was a businessman dealing in auto salvage. He despised Saddam Hussein and his oppressive, vindictive ways. Muhammad was glad Saddam's reign of terrorism was finally ending. Luckily, before his SUV was attacked, Muhammad, his sister, and their children had time to duck inside the car. Muhammad and his sister screamed for their children to get down. Bullets were everywhere. Muhammad would look to see what was happening. He saw the man next to him run, in which he was killed. The Blackwater Guards were firing indiscriminately. Iraqi traffic police initially tried to wave down the Blackwater men, but there was no threat. They too had to run for cover. Muhammad kept seeing the man on the ground next to him being fired upon as he lay dead. Machine gun fire would cause his lifeless body to shake in this pool of blood. In the middle of the attack, Muhammad could not understand why this man lying dead was a target, and he could not understand what was happening or why. But he knew he was surviving as he kept yelling for his children in the back of his SUV to stay down. In the immediate aftermath of the attacks, Blackwater's rights to conduct work in Iraq were temporarily suspended. Several Iraqi and American investigators have been conducted into the incident. The incident caused Iraqi Prime Minister Nur al-Maliki to call on the U.S. government to end its contract with Blackwater, and for the Iraqi government to push for an apology, compensation for victims or their families, and for the guards involved in the shooting to be held accountable. The U.S. House passed a bill titled the Military Extraterritorial Jurisdiction Act that would make all private contractors working in Iraq and other combat zones subject to prosecution by U.S. courts. The U.S. State Department said it planned to investigate what it called a terrible incident. According to Iraqi Prime Minister al-Maliki, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice promised a fair and transparent investigation into the incident. The State Department announced an American-Iraqi Joint Commission to investigate both the shooting and the broader issue of employing private security contractors. The committee was co-chaired by Abd al-Qadir, the Iraqi Minister of Defense, and Patricia A. Butenis, the charge d'affaires of the U.S. Embassy in Iraq. Henry Waxman, the chair of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, which held hearings on the use of private security contractors in February 2007, said the committee would hold hearings to understand what has happened and the extent of the damage to U.S. security interests. Waxman also stated that the controversy over Blackwater is an unfortunate demonstration of the perils of excessive reliance on private security contractors. And on October 4, 2007, the Federal Bureau of Investigation announced it would be taking the lead in the investigation of the shooting incident. On October 2nd, 2007, the Democratic staff of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee released a report stating that Blackwater guards had used deadly force weekly in Iraq and had inflicted significant casualties and property damage. The report found that the guards fired their weapons 195 times from the beginning of 2005 through the second week of September 2005. The report further said that Blackwater had reported that its forces fired first in over 80% of the cases. On October 4th, 2007, U.S. military reports indicated Blackwater guards had opened fire without provocation and used excessive force. It was obviously excessive, a U.S. military official speaking on conditions of anonymity told the Washington Post. He would go on to say the civilians that were fired upon, they didn't have any weapons to fire back at them, and none of the Iraqi police or any of the local security forces fired back at them. The Blackwater guards appeared to have fired grenade launchers in addition to machine guns, according to the report. And on October 13, 2007, the FBI reported that it had concluded that at least 14 of the 17 Iraqis who died in the square have been killed without cause. The three justifiable killings were those of the two passengers in the white Kia sedan and an unidentified Iraqi nearby. The Blackwater spokeswoman responded to the findings by saying Blackwater supports the stringent accountability of the industry. If it is determined that one person was complicit in the wrongdoing, we would support accountability in that. The key people in this have not spoken with investigators. On April 1st, 2011, the Associated Press reported on Eric Prince's 7-hour testimony about what allegedly transpired. Prince strongly criticized the way in which federal authorities had handled the investigation and disputed the claims that U.S. or Blackwater personnel were to blame for the shootings. In his testimony, Prince noted that it seems the ballistics analysis was done to prove the guilt of the Americans, not to just try to identify what happened there. Eric Prince said that he didn't believe the FBI had fully investigated the sources of all the used bullets in Nisour Square, arguing that it would have been helpful if the defense had been in possession of a complete ballistics report. FBI scientists couldn't match bullets from the square to guns carried by the Blackwater guards, and FBI investigators found foreign cartridge cases of a kind not used by U.S. or Blackwater personnel. As shootings in the square were not uncommon, it is unclear whether the shells were from a shooting in question or from other incidents. U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert Gates testified before Congress that the Pentagon has sufficient legal authority to control its contractors, but that commanders lack sufficient means and resources to exercise adequate oversight. On October 4, 2007, the U.S. House passed a bill that would make all private contractors working in Iraq and other combat zones subject to the Military Extraterritorial Jurisdiction Act, and thus prosecution by U.S. courts. Senate Democratic leaders said they plan to pass similar legislation as soon as possible. December 2008, the United States Department of Justice announced it was filing criminal charges against 5 of the Blackwater employees and ordered them to surrender to the FBI. 5 were charged with 14 counts of manslaughter, 20 counts of attempted manslaughter, and a weapons violation. Donald Bell, a former Marine from West Valley City, Utah; Dustin Heard, a former Marine from Knoxville, Tennessee; Evan Liberty, a former Marine from Rochester, New Hampshire; Nicholas Slatten, a former Army sergeant from Sparta, Tennessee; and Paul Slough, an Army veteran from Keller, Texas. 6th Blackwater guard, Jeremy Ridgway of California, struck a deal with prosecutors on December 4, 2008, and pleaded guilty to 1 count each of voluntary manslaughter, attempted manslaughter, and aiding and abetting and agreed to testify against the 5 other men. The trial was set for early 2010, but the charges were dismissed by the United States District Court for the District of Columbia as Judge Ricardo Urbina on December 31st, 2009, who ruled that the Justice Department had mishandled evidence and violated the guards' constitutional rights. In the memorandum opinion, Judge Urbina ruled the case against Slough, Liberty, Heard, Ball, and Slatten had been improperly built on testimony given in exchange for immunity. That evidence included statements the guards had been compelled to give to the State Department investigators, and as these statements would have been self-incriminating, they could not be used as evidence under the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Prosecutors should therefore have built their case against the men without them, a BBC report explained. The opinion elaborated the government failed to establish that the Iraqi witnesses that presented to the second grand jury were not in any way influenced by the previous exposure to the defendant's compelled statements. This evidentiary use of tainted information constitutes yet another Castigar violation. Iraqi Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki harshly criticized the dismissal. And 3 weeks later, Vice President Joe Biden, who was overseeing U.S. policy in Iraq, promised Iraqi leaders the U.S. would appeal the dismissal of these charges. On April 22nd, 2011, after closed-door testimony, a federal appeals court panel revived the Justice Department's prosecution of the former Blackwater guards by reinstating the manslaughter charges against the 5 men. The 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit found systematic errors in the district court's 2009 decision to dismiss charges against the 5 former Blackwater guards and added, "We find that the district court's findings depend on the erroneous view of the law." September 2013, the charges against Paul were dropped. Prosecutors stated they reached their decision after an assessment of the admissible evidence against them. The other 4 went on trial starting on June 17, 2014. 10 weeks of testimony and 28 days of jury deliberations resulted in convictions of all 4 men on October 22nd, 2014. Nicholas Slatten was found guilty of first-degree murder. Slough, Liberty, and Heard were found guilty of voluntary and attempted manslaughter charges of using a machine gun to commit a violent crime. Jurors sided with prosecution's contention that the shooting was a criminal act, not a battlefield encounter gone wrong. Slatten faced a potential sentence of life in prison. The other 3 guards faced decades in prison. The weapons charges carried a minimum 30-year sentence under a law enacted during the 1990s cocaine epidemic. However, their sentences were not long enough. On December 22nd, 2020, U.S. President Donald Trump granted a full presidential pardon to Slatten, Slough, Liberty, and Heard. A White House statement said the men had a long history of service to the nation as veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces, that there was strong support for the patrons from the public and elected officials. The White House further stated that the Court of Appeals ruled that additional evidence should have been presented at Mr. Slatten's trial, and recently that prosecutors said that the lead Iraqi investigator, who prosecutors relied heavily on to verify there were no insurgent victims and to collect evidence, may have had ties to insurgents groups himself. Clemency caused outrage, obviously, among Iraqi citizens and family members of the victims. The United Nations Human Rights Office spokeswoman Marta Hurtado said that forgiveness contributes to impunity and has the effect of encouraging others to commit such crimes in the future. The Iraqi Foreign Ministry urged the United States to reconsider, declaring the pardons did not take into account the seriousness of the crime committed. But in regards to all of what I just said, The victims here are not the Blackwater guards. The victims here are the people that were killed and maimed. Their names are as follows: the 14 who were killed: Ahmed Hassam Ahmed al-Rubili, Mahassin Mohsen Kadem al-Khazali, Osama Fadhil Abbas, Ali Mohammed Haftev Abdul Razak, who was 9 years old, Mohammed Abbas Mahmoud, Qasim Mohammed Abbas Mahmoud, Saad al-Abbas al-Hakra, Mushtaq Karim Abid al-Razak, Garia Hassan Ali, Ibrahim Abid Ayash, Hamoud Saeed Abatan, Uday Ismail Ibrahim, Mahdi Sahab Nasir, and Ali Khalil Abdul Hussein. 20 others were also injured in this massacre. And even though that they enjoy their freedom, they will forever be haunted by the screams and by their actions against a civilian as young as 9 and to unarmed men and women in the streets, victims of American imperialism, in which a war on their country, which was fabricated by evidence that clearly didn't exist. Any real justice would see these men in prison for the rest of their lives, and also to those who forced the U.S. military to engage against the Iraqi civilians and the insurgents on fabricated evidence purported by George Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Feith, Richard Pearl, Donald Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, and the rest of the disgusting neocon faction, as well as the CIA, who helped to fabricate that evidence, Director George Tenet, and Deputy of Directorate of Operations James Pavitt. All should be tried at The Hague and sentenced to life in prison. But we don't live in a world of justice.